Welcome to Uncopyable Women in Business. I'm your host, Kay Miller, also known as Muffler Mama. Now, I don't know if you're an entrepreneur, business owner, sales professional, or part of an organization, but I do know that you want to be more successful, earn more money, and make a bigger impact. Stay tuned as I, along with my guests, give you marketing, sales, and personal branding strategies that will give you an uncopyable advantage. Today, my guest is Jess Pettitt, who is riding in on not one, but two horses. Jess spent 10 years serving as a university administrator for diversity and inclusion by day and doing stand-up in New York's most popular comedy clubs at night. Jess now gallops coast to coast, delivering her good enough now message to help organizations who are ready to take the leap forward, creating more inclusive and effective cultures. Jess, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm glad that you are happy to be here. During the intro, I mentioned the two horses, and I know a little bit about that, but why don't you give our listeners a little background on that, what that means to you?
Sure. The base of the idea is that two things happen at once. And I use the metaphor of two horses quite a bit because we end up spending too much time on one of them and the other one is the counterpole. So when talking to like other speakers, for example, I will talk about the two horses we're constantly riding on while working with our audiences is the horse of ego and the horse of humility. And we all know people who have been on one horse too long because they're either egotistical maniacs that could use some humbling, or they're self-deprecating imposter syndrome, fraud things. Both of those happen all the time in this business, but you need to be on the ego horse when you're writing your web copy. And you need to be on your humility horse when you're actually open to learning and engaging with your audiences. So you have to ride both horses at once.
And I think we think of ego as bad or pushy or whatever, but you have to self-promote when you are in any kind of business. Of course, you're in the speaking and training arena. And I think we're taught to, don't brag or don't acknowledge compliments, but I like that balance of there's a time for both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
I have to tell somebody that I'm worth spending money on. And I also need to be a student in order to teach anybody anything.
And speaking of being a student, you have a brand new book out and we both have it in our background. And this one's called Almost Doing Good, which I love that title. And of course, you said that's the prequel to your first book, which
Correct.
is called Doing Good, correct?
Good enough now.
Good enough now. Sorry,
Yes.
Good enough now, which I love that title. You have an interesting brand. In watching some of your speaking reels and your website, seeing pictures of you, you dress in very unconventional clothes. Your topic is, of course, DEI. I'll say DEI because it's such a mouth. How have you created your brand? And what does that brand mean in setting yourself apart from everyone else?
I think it's a smart follow-up question to the two horses because when I'm building my brand as a business, so I opened my business in 2005. And so there's the pieces of me that I wanted to put out into the world, and I needed to differentiate myself from other people that buyers would confuse me with. So there's some people that I hope they're confusing me with because I want to be in those comparison conversations. And there's other people that I'm like, nope, we're totally different. So how do I lean into what I'm bringing to how I'm bringing, right? I think that is the first horse of building my brand. What's interesting is that as I was building my business, I was told not to be funny. And so I spent like a year or so trying really hard to not be funny because my topic is serious and you shouldn't be funny. First, to not be funny. So that was really hard. But what was interesting, and you mentioned like people talk about my hair dye or whatever. I just got my hair done today, so it's not pink anymore. My tattoos or my clothes or whatever, those were never negotiable. So then the thing that became negotiable was whether to be funny or not. And I don't know how to not be funny. So the second horse of this is that I will never buy me. I spend money to get away from me, whether that's meditating or vacations or therapy or whatever. I don't need any more time with me. But people who do buy me, or my audiences or my participants, what is it about me that they like or that resonates with them? And if I only do that, I could very easily not be true to myself. But if I ride both horses at once, then I'm differentiating in the way I want to be differentiated and listening to my buyers and how they interpret me being different and what that means. And for me, the secret ingredient was being really funny with really touchy subjects. And so if I can bring those two things together, the hair dye, the tattoos, the clothes, etc., for me, it is an invitation, as it allows people to break the ice and have a little bit of a conversation with me, or it makes them a little bit uncomfortable before I make them very uncomfortable. Both of those are wins for me. So then I just doubled down.
I love humor. In fact, I used to be a humor writer. When my daughter was little, I wrote in Toddler Times. You may not have heard of Toddler Times, but I just think laughter is such a key to life. In fact, I've been married for 37 years. We've been married. And if I had to boil down our secret to success, it would be laughter. Right. And when I looked at Kelly and how she would pore over the book, where's Waldo? She had to find Waldo. But then I'd say, okay, you need to go find your shoes. Oh, Mom, I don't want to go look through my shoes. Humor is so important, and I think is appropriate to any situation. Sometimes the darkest time, humor is what saves us. So the only thing worse than don't be funny is to say be funny. But
a lot of people don't understand that comedians usually are pretty dark people. And that's the humor is the light, right? And I think when we start talking about fear and anxiety and we worry about doing the right thing or worry about getting canceled or whatever, humor can be a really great equalizer in what can often be polarizing or really touchy subjects. So here I am.
Here you are. And I think humor breaks the tension a lot of times. Like I said, I'm a fan. So how do you use your uniqueness? Like you said, you don't appeal to everyone. And of course, I mentioned, we just wrote our book on personal branding. And a lot of times people try to be like other people. And that's not why people choose you. Like you said, the right people will choose you. The wrong people you won't appeal to. And that's okay. You're not right for everyone. You never are, right? So how do you use what you've built as what I would consider an uncopyable brand? How do you use that in your marketing and branding and attracting new clients?
I stopped worrying about being copied. I think that's probably the first thing. There's a lot of my material, especially when I was doing like heavier training workshop kind of work, where people would take my handouts and white out my citation or something and put it out on their own. And more power to you. If I like to say, like when I'm selling books in the back of the room, if people need to steal a diversity related book, then it is in the right hands, right? I'm just not going to stress out about it. So when people would copy my work or copy my facilitation approach, etc., they often would mess it up. And the only people who could fix it is me. So thanks for the job security. I realized, luckily, I think very early on, I don't want to work 365 days a year. So some of the days that I don't want to work, more power to other people doing this work and having those conversations. I need a day off. I don't even want to work half of the year, right? And even if I worked 2/3 of the year, I can only be in one place at a time, maybe two now that we're like obsessed with virtual stuff. I can't be in every ballroom every single day. And so it doesn't make any sense to compete on that level. And I think that competition is related to that sense of copying or being copied versus what I like to refer to as cooperation. And that is, I'm going to do it my little sliver way. And then I feel very fortunate that I've befriended dozens of people in my niche area where a buyer thinks we all do the same thing, but we're crystal clear on how we are different. So then we can refer each other to work that's a better client will be happier and the speaker will be happier.
And if someone does copy you, of course, that's the sincerest form of flattery, as they say. But no one really can copy you because being on your personal brand, which I believe yours is very strong, is such a combination of who you are, your stories, your beliefs. And then, of course, you've got your ways of communicating that brand, which is pretty wild outfits, some wild hair, some tattoos, which again won't resonate with everyone. I think it's cool. And if someone does copy you, it's going to be pretty obvious. Don't you think?
Possibly. Some people don't think what I do is wild or weird, right? It's all a spectrum of things. I like to make a joke that I'm not the only one in the room who uses hair dye. I just might be the only one who chose this color. And I don't even choose it. I outsource it to Jane. She picks.
There you go. You might not even be the only one on this call who uses hair dye.
Maybe.
That's all I'm going to say. Okay. Yeah, you're very real. And you talk about this DEI topic that it's really new in the grand scheme of things, being sensitive to all of that. And there are people, and I have to include myself, who still struggle with some of that. So how can we, especially as someone like me, like a person who doesn't have any of those tattoos or whatever, how can we be sensitive to people who aren't like us?
First thing I guess I would say is recognizing that not everybody is like us is the first step. I don't want to have too long of an answer, but there's a assessment tool that I use quite often in my work that has like a spectrum of skill development. And what I love about it is that where instead of it being like lower on the skills and higher on the skills, when people don't necessarily acknowledge that there are people different than them, that's where our own traditions and our own cultural norms really get instilled in us. I like to think of families that celebrate high holidays together. There is a pan or a knife or a chair, or there is something that is usually consistent in how that tradition is celebrated in that family. And you don't realize that it's not that way everywhere else until someone loses that gravy boat. And then you're like, get out of that field. Where's the gravy boat? So you then develop skills that you could use a different kind of gravy boat. Some people don't even eat gravy. Some people aren't even celebrating this holiday, right? And so then we usually pass pretty quick judgment about our team or that team. One of them is usually better or worse. Then as we develop more skills, we begin to realize that there can be difference, but there can be similarities at the same time. So we all bleed red, or these homogeneous, harmonious ways of looking at the world, which is great, especially because you were just good, bad, or completely oblivious. And then once you can build more skills past, what you're realizing is that people can be wildly different than you, but it doesn't actually impact you. You can be curious and interested in those differences, but you're not necessarily affected by those difference of opinions until eventually you can adapt to whatever the differences are needed without it compromising your own kind of moral character. That's the skill development arc, right? But it all starts with something as simple as not being threatened that not everybody does exactly the way you do. How do people take their coffee, right?
What's that?
How do people take their coffee? We're totally comfortable with there's a gazillion ways of ordering your coffee. And if you were fetching coffee for somebody else, you could ask them, like, how much creamer do you need? How much sugar do you need? What's your milk preference? We can take in those differences and we're not threatened by them. It's the exact same skill sets when we start talking about culture and language and the identities that we bring forward and those that we put in the back shelf.
This podcast is sponsored by my latest book, which I co-authored with my husband, Steve. It's part of the Uncopyable series, and this one's called Uncopyable You. Create a personal brand that gets people to know you, like you, trust you, and remember you. Order it now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your favorite independent bookstore. I love being around people who are not like me. But I think especially for older people, which I guess I have to include myself, it's an adjustment and it's a new world for us. So I think awareness and, like you said, being accepting and not thinking that one way is better or worse than another.
Right. It's just a way, right? I think we probably both identify as white women, and me having visible tattoos may be something that's different for you than different for me, but it doesn't mean you're some stodgy conservative I could never talk to. And it doesn't mean I'm some wild haired hellion. Interesting. How does that impact your brand? Like you can engage in a conversation that's not threatening or threatened.
Those are great points. And like I said, being aware and just being open. Our world is changing and we have to change with it, and we should change with it. I want to talk a little bit about one of the trainings. I don't know if you call it trainings or keynotes that you do, conversations that matter, making better connections. And you have a 3-part framework for taking responsibility of who you are and how you show up. Can you explain what that framework is?
Sure. And I built backwards on that framework for the prequel of the book that just came out. So the framework in Good Enough Now is really trying to figure out how your life has taught you to show up in a way that where you feel the most. There's no judgment about how your life has taught you to feel safe and prepared, but just how might that be different? So I narrow down the 3 ways into head, heart, and action. And heady does not mean smart, it just means detail oriented. Hearty does not mean emotionally available, it just means big ideas. And most of my consulting clients are dealing with miscommunications between those 2 people, the details and the big ideas. When someone has some giant idea and they're talking to someone who invokes a budget line or a bylaw, it looks like they're miscommunicating, but they're just responding to the same thing from a different place. And then the third one is action-oriented, which are not as interested in the ideas or the idea development or the details as much as they are of just get it done. I like to think about if you're planning a wedding, the idea person might be thinking about like the ambiance of the experience, whereas the detail person might be keeping a budget and trying to figure out what to spend a little bit more money on or a little less money on. And the action-oriented person wants to know where to put the napkins. But typically, we need all 3 people to really make good choices, and all 3 variables are in us at all times. We just typically only use 1 or 2 of them because we're comfortable.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I would like to delve a little, just for fun, into your background in comedy. It sounds like you have some fun stories. One of them is about Bob Newhart, who, of course, just passed away. And what a brilliant guy. And I think appealed to every kind of person in my book. So what happened between you or not between you? Tell your Bob Newhart story and a little bit of your stand-up experience.
Sure. So I worked as a college administrator when I was at NYU. And this is right after 9/11, early 2000s. And after my father died, I enrolled in a stand-up comedy class, probably as part of my kind of grief work. And the final for the class was a 10-minute set at Caroline's, which seemed incredibly intimidating. And I couldn't think of anything scarier to do to honor my father's passing. So I took the class, I did the 10-minute set, and we didn't know this, but there were agents and things watching the sets. So I got picked up to MC one of the first lesbian stand-up comedy shows in New York, which was like at 5:00 in the afternoon on a Thursday. So it was not very popular.
Not the peak crowd there, huh? Got to start somewhere.
But the cool thing is that it was right around the corner from the Letterman studio when Dave Letterman still had a talk show. And fancy people would come in and warm up at that hour before going to record for their television show. So we had like a go light, a stop light, and then there was a purple light. And when the purple light was on, somebody famous was there. So it was just get off the stage. Nobody cares about you. So then I got to see Robin Williams and Chris Rock and George Carlin and Newhart and people randomly practicing on the stage. So it was also an election year. And so I eventually got picked up for a gig where they needed an MC who was a nobody. Hello, honored, happy to help. But there were private fundraising parties for the Democratic Party in New York, and they needed a host to wrangle the famous comedians. So my job was to be absolutely forgettable, but keep it on time. And so I would go and find all the famous people and get them out of the bathroom or away from the bar or whatever. Up, okay, get off stage. So that was the start of my MC career. And as we started doing it, I was doing it each and every party. So eventually we would hang out after the shows, or we'd go to open mic shows together. And in the evening, we'd go to some Chinese food restaurant back room. And this was the coolest part, is that we'd actually write jokes and like wordsmiths with each other. And the actual Bob Newhart story is that we have almost the same birthday. And so one of the times in September when we were in the Chinese food restaurant, the guys ordered a pyramid of egg rolls and we sang happy birthday to each other.
It was probably just so fun to be around all those people. And of course, speaking is such a big fear. There's the saying, you'd rather die in a fire than speak. And of course, the best way to get over that is to speak. And do you think that's where you really got the bug to be on stage?
I think that's where I think eventually I realized that it was a skill I could add to training and facilitation and keynoting that people would pay for. I don't think I realized, because I barely got paid. I got paid in like a bar tab, so it wasn't really a money maker. But as I got more involved with events, I started realizing like I could MC. Oh, wait, that's like a job. I should tell people I do that. But I hadn't really put it together. I come from a long line of funny storytellers. And so doing that with a point mixed with being an educator, I think really led me down this path. And then just getting fired over and over again eventually had me open my own business.
Getting fired over and over again, huh? That sounds like there's a story there.
4 of 5 jobs. So I was just in charge of, my job was pointing out how different universities weren't serving marginalized communities. And nobody wanted to actually know that they weren't serving marginalized communities. So then I would get fired and just go get another job and do it again until I got fired. Then I go do it again.
And then you start your own business. Yeah, I suppose a lot of organizations, what do we say, have their head in the sand about this and it's an uncomfortable topic. I can see why they don't always embrace that willingly. So you have to find the right fit. How do we help each other, besides what you've talked about, to be sensitive to DEI, to other people who aren't like us, besides being aware? Is there language? Are there tips or skills that someone listening can use?
Sounds like y'all should read my book.
It does. Good job. Look at your book. Yes, buy your book, Good Enough Now. I've actually read the second book, but sounds like that is the place to go to get that more information. And of course, you can order that on Amazon. Where else? Can you get it through your website?
Good Enough Now is much more about individual responsibility. And then the newest book, Almost Doing Good, which launches October 8th, is much more about organizational responsibility. So depending on kind of what level you're paying attention, we give human rights to organizations, even though we don't give human rights equally to all humans. So those organizations need to be able to identify what they stand for, what's their culture, and what are they going to do with it. So that's really what the premise of Almost Doing Good is. So if you run your own business, you run your own household, you could benefit from Almost Doing Good. And if you just want to do your own individual work and how your life taught you who and how to be in the world, then that would be Good Enough Now. Both are available on Amazon. And yeah, that's about it.
What's the best way for people to connect with you?
So I'm on the typical social media platforms as either Jess Pettitt or Good Enough Now. And the websites reroute to each other because no one can spell my last name. So you can go to goodenoughnow.com. You can go to almostdoinggood.com and learn more about either book or my work or MC work or whatever. And I'm happy to be of service.
Great. Yeah, there's a lot of T's in there, right? What it is, P-E-T-I-T-T.
Correct. It's only 7 letters long, so they point it out to me almost every day.
Yeah. And I assume are you welcome to LinkedIn connections or being followed?
Sure. I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. So,
okay.
yeah.
Cool. Do you have any particular closing thoughts that you could leave us with besides what we've already talked about?
I think the connection between my work and your work around branding, I think isn't a big leap. I think for some people it might feel like a jump. But if you don't know who and how you are in the world, you're never going to be able to create an uncopyable brand. And by leaning into who and how you want to be, now you have an aspirational brand that can really lead others to understand your own value set. And then that helps you make all your business decisions. So I see them as very in sync with one another.
Yes. And I'm just going to throw out something else, even though we're almost done. But somebody I interviewed, Kate Strachnyi, she said the way she defines a personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And so everyone already does have a personal brand. And I think what you do, and we definitely do also in our Uncopyable You book, is to help people make that brand intentional. Like you said, what really is important to you? What stories do you have that represent who you are? What is your branding promise? And I think a lot of people just let that happen in their lives instead of being really intentional about it. It's really important. You're going to be more successful. You're going to be more authentic, which I know is a buzzword for you, and make a bit bigger impact.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like being passive about the messages you're putting out in the world is the boldest message you could put out into the world. So just mean it. Whatever it is you're going to do, put a little attention behind it. And it's more in line with who and how you want to be in the world. And that's better for everybody.
And don't be afraid to be different. People don't pick you just because you're like everyone else. They want to know what's different about you, what value you'll bring. Again, yes, order Jessica's book. I'm sorry, Jess. Really, you go by Jess, although your name is Jessica. Probably don't care, right? Good Enough Now. She has a new book, Almost Doing Good, which I love that title too, because it used to be when you say, how are you doing? You couldn't say I'm doing good. Now I think it's just, you can say that. So anyway, Jess, thank you so much for spending time on the podcast with me and discussing these really important topics that are just only going to be more and more important as we move forward. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Uncopyable Women in Business. If you enjoyed the show, you know the drill. Please like, share, rate, and review it on your favorite platform. I also invite you to join my private Facebook group, Uncopyable Women in Business. See you next time, and always remember to be uncopyable.